Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, welcome to a new look for my Strat. Until about an hour ago, this thing was a blackguard and has been ever since I bought it back in 2012. But I've wanted to experiment with a white pickguard on this guitar for a while now. So seeing as today we're going to be comparing two sets of pickups, that of course means having the guitar in pieces. So it seemed a sensible time to track down a left-handed mint pickguard and swap it in for the blackguard. And I have to say, I'm absolutely loving how this guitar looks. The natural body with the white plastics, the whole thing just pops more than it did before. I think it looks ace. Anyway, when it comes to speccing up a style of guitar for me, the process I generally follow is I look at the very earliest iteration of that style of guitar that was ever made and copy the tech specs, basically. I then live with that guitar for a while and see whether anything about it jumps out as being worth exploring or experimenting with to make the guitar more to my personal tastes. But starting with the very earliest iteration seems to have worked pretty well for me over the years. So with Telecasters, for example, I started with the slightly hotter Broadcaster thing, found that to be a little bit dark and compressed for me, so I moved one era forward to the kind of flat pole 52 thing, and I've never left. That's the sound of the Telecaster that just really speaks to me. Now, when it's come to Strats, it's been a similar journey, but a little bit different, because I love Strats, this Strat in particular, but I'm not a Strat guy. I would tend to go for a Les Paul into a Marshall or a Tele into an AC30 before reaching for a Strat. So I love this guitar, but it's not my go-to, as it were. But I've followed a similar process. The pickups I've had in this guitar for a few years now have been the Fralin Real 54s, which are very accurate replicas of the very earliest iteration of Strat pickups, the AlNiCo III pickups from 1954. And I've really enjoyed those pickups over the years. They sound amazing. But when it comes to real Strat aficionados, Strat heads if you will, the era of Strat they tend to go for and say to them sounds the best is the early 60s Strats, kind of 62 through 64, somewhere around then. And I've often wondered how the Fralin Real 54s would compare to a set of equivalent 60s Strat replica pickups. So today I'm going to find out. So I'm going to compare the Real 54s to the pickups I now have in this guitar. And these are said to be some of the absolute finest 60s Strat pickups you can get. These are the Mark Foley 60s Pre-CBS pickups. And I've put them in this guitar, and of course it'd be very easy to spot when I'm going between the Fralins and the Foleys because the plastics will be a completely different colour. And today I'm going to compare my sets of 50s replica pickups to the 60s replica pickups and just see what the differences are. Why are the early 60s Strat pickups held in a higher regard to the early 50s pickups? Now, I've measured the DC resistances of all of the pickups, and DC resistance isn't output at all. It's just an indication of how much copper is around the magnets. And the middle and neck pickups of both sets are pretty much exactly the same. The only slight difference is the bridge pickups, because the Foley bridge pickup is about 6k DC resistance. The Fralin Real 54 bridge pickup is about 6.6. There's a little bit, has a bit more copper around the magnet. Again, it's not higher output as such. There's many factors at play when it comes to the output of a pickup. Capacitance, the henries of the magnets and all that sort of stuff. It's all a balancing act. But DC resistance is an indication, at least, of how hot a pickup may or may not be. And I've also copied the setup that I had for the Fralins with the Foleys. Now, this might not be the best setup for these pickups because every set of pickups in every different guitar requires a slightly different setup. But I've matched them so that we can fundamentally compare what the differences between the pickups are without hearing a setup difference, because a pickup that's closer to the strings will sound different to a pickup that's set further down, all that sort of stuff. So I've made it as fair a test as possible. So today I'm going to put both sets of pickups in this guitar through my Dr. Z Master over my shoulder there, because a Strat into a Fender style amp is the quintessential pairing for this guitar with an amplifier. And I'm just going to cycle through each of the 5 pickup positions. The amp's going to be set very loud and just on the edge of breakup. So if I hit the guitar really hard, it might start to crunch up a bit, but it's pretty much set clean. But at the end, I am also going to throw on a few gain pedals to see how both sets interact with some gain stages. But I'm going to stick to the gain pedals that are most synonymous with the Strat, so mid-pushed overdrives, basically. TS-808 replica, Klon, the Kingsley Page probably, because that's quite a thick lower middly thing. And I just want to see what the differences are between my sets of 50s replica Strat pickups and 60s replica Strat pickups. So, without further ado, folks, here we go. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath, let me know what you were hearing today, what differences were jumping out at you, which set of pickups did you prefer and why. Do you prefer this guitar with the black guard or the white guard? I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks down in the comment section. Now, there were definitely differences between those two sets of pickups, wasn't there? But they weren't enormous differences in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't like going from a Strat to a Les Paul or anything like that. Going between the two sets was a fairly similar experience all round. But that said, the differences that were there are important ones. So to me, firstly, the 60s pickups seem to have a slightly hotter output than the 50s. But as I said in the intro, that isn't DC resistance because they're pretty much the same between the two sets. There's many factors at play when it comes to how a pickup is voiced and how much output it can generate. And I found that the 60s pickups were pushing the amp just that little bit more than the 50s. But the biggest difference by a long way was the mid-range of the two sets of pickups. To me, the 60s pickups were a bit thicker in the lower mid-range, but very sort of bitey and snappy in the upper mid-range compared to the 50s. There was a lot more going on with the 60s pickups, if that's not too technical a term. And you know what it put me in mind of? With the output difference and that EQ difference going between the two sets, it reminded me of if you've ever driven two cars of the same model, but one is the sports version. If that's a very loose analogy, they look the same, they kind of feel the same, it's a very similar experience, but one is a little bit more relaxed for driving around on a summer's day, the other's a bit more beefed up and snappy and quick and aggressive for driving around the track, but they're still fundamentally the same model. If that makes any sort of sense, that's what going between these two sets of pickups was for me. The 50s were just a bit more relaxed, a very pleasant set of pickups to play. The 60s were just a little bit more bitey and aggressive. But the other thing I really hope comes across on the audio, I haven't listened back to it yet, is the difference in the experience of playing the two pickups. Because I think the 60s spec pickups, the Mark Foleys, were much more dynamic in terms of their playing experience. But I don't mean dynamic range as such, I mean the frequency response of the pickups and the EQ that they push. Because with the 50s pickups, hit the guitar hard, it's louder, hit the guitar softly, it's less. But they sound pretty similar when you back off from your picking dynamics. The EQ doesn't really change. But with the 60s spec pickups, I found that if I hit the guitar hard, they wanted to rip your head off. But back off, and the top end became really kind of rounded and mellow. So you could be very creative with your picking dynamics, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of the EQ. They seem to push more upper mids the harder you push the guitar. And it wasn't just volume. It definitely seemed to be a shift in the frequency response with the 60s Foley pickups. But that might just be in my head, folks, so please do comment underneath, let me know if you were hearing anything similar. Do you agree with my opinions today, disagree? I love getting your thoughts underneath all of these videos. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a huge difference when you hit subscribe, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.